Hi, I'm Brenda Reiss, freedom and forgiveness coach, and a person just like you that is learning to navigate life and all of its challenges. I teach a forgiveness process like no other. It's a blend of practical and spiritual forgiveness. This process guides you into knowing how unforgiveness can be keeping you stuck in your relationships, both personally and professionally, and how it prevents you from releasing resentment and finding joy. Each week, I share practical and some not so practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and other people that are on this journey just like us. This is for you if you are ready to turn your pain into peace. Welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast. Welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast with Brenda Reiss, a place where you can turn your pain into peace. Today, I'm really excited for my guest, Jennifer Soames. And we've known each other for quite a while. And what I want to share with you about Jennifer is that she is a traumatic brain injury survivor and advocate. She's also an author and a former holistic health practitioner and yoga instructor. There's nothing this girl can't do. She is passionate about helping those affected by TBIs, by the traumatic brain injuries, to help them get information, care, and the support they need to live their best life, even with this new normal, because she understands firsthand the pain, the grief, the frustration, loneliness, and the other challenges of living with a life-altering trauma, like living with a chronic debilitating illness, becoming disabled, losing one's sense of self and purpose, and the post-traumatic growth that also comes from these experiences. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you my friend, Jennifer Soames. Welcome, my dear.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm so happy to be here today with you.
Yeah, we have been colleagues and friends for 9 years or so. I was trying to think of when we even met, at 2015, 16, something.
Around there. It's been a while. I lost track too.
It's been a long time. And I love it because, getting to know each other as colleagues and then learning to share certain things, because you helped me a lot with the structural integration, with the things to help my own body, as you were also going through your own traumatic brain injury experiences. And for those people, because I really think this is going to touch a lot of people who are going through this chronic pain that actually, like we were talking before we started, that may have a traumatic brain injury and don't even really realize it or know it, or at least it's not getting the attention that it needs. So maybe sharing your story, your background a little bit would be helpful for people.
Yeah. So when I tell people that I live with a traumatic brain injury, the first thing everyone wants to know was, how did it happen? So just the Cliffs Notes version to keep it short here. But back in November of 2013, I was in a horseback riding lesson because I love horses. I've been a rider most of my life and was riding a horse that I knew but had never ridden before. We had a pretty good ride, but she spooked. And I'll tell you that no matter how good of a rider you are, or you think you are, when a horse spooks, sometimes gravity and physics do not work in your favor. So I came off. I was wearing my helmet, of course, and I didn't fully lose consciousness, but I remember not being able to see, laying on the arena floor in the dirt and not being able to see, and hearing my friend and trainer saying, "Don't move." And I don't know how long that was, but I did. Once we figured out that I was relatively, quote, okay, didn't have any broken bones, I did what any other typical horse person does. I got back on. We had a nice few minutes of just a really simple, easy ride to close out our lesson. And I drove myself home, which was about an hour, and realizing that I was getting increasingly tired and ridiculously tired, wanting to fall asleep, the wheel kind of tired. And I went, oh shit, I have a concussion. And the only way I knew that was because I happened to write a paper about it way back in massage school a long, long time ago. But did I do anything about it? No, I just went home because I didn't want to go to the ER because I'm like, well, what are they going to do for me? And I just wanted to be home. But I did go to chiropractor, and one of my colleagues and friends, craniosacral therapist, the next day. She convinced me to go to the ER and get a CT scan, make sure I didn't have any internal bleeding. And I was like, okay, for you, Nancy, I'll do it. Right. But not really like because I thought it was a good idea. So they diagnosed me there with concussion. And I want to make it very clear that a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. They're synonymous. It's like saying trash or garbage, two different names for the same thing. And my husband drove me up there. I was having probably I had the worst night of my life that I can hopefully ever experience that night. But we drove from the ER, and we were just shy of being home. We were about 4 miles shy of being home, and we went through an intersection. We had the green light, and there was a woman driving the opposite direction who decided to turn left immediately in front of us. So again, physics not on my side. And my husband couldn't avoid hitting her. Just, it was impossible. And of course, it hit my side, the passenger side of the vehicle. And my 1-year-old new car, first new car I've ever bought. And I just actually closed out my accident related treatment for another really, really very serious car accident in which I'd also been passenger almost exactly a year prior. So those two incidents in November of 2013 were about 25 hours apart.
Ugh.
So I like to joke now, because I can joke about it now. It's like, go big or go home, right? So why make it just one? Like, let's do two things, because, one's not enough. And little did I know that when the doctor at the ER gave me a 2-page handout and said, you'll be fine in 2 weeks, how wrong they were.
Oh my God, absolutely. Because you were dealing with stuff when I met you.
Yes. Years later.
Yeah, several years later. And thank you for sharing that, because it's been one hell of a ride for you. And and I like how you talk about post-traumatic growth. But before we get there, because I know it took you a while
Yeah.
get to that point, because in this, you were working like you couldn't work, and then you went back to doing the work, but then you had to close your business. And that, being there with you through that, was heartbreaking. And for myself too, because you are a wonderful practitioner. But just because, having to do that is a lot. People have to do that. And some people, they struggle with it. Mm-hmm. And along with this, comes grief that I want to tie into, because you do, right. You wrote one of the best blogs that I've read about grief. And during that time, or was it shortly thereafter? I think it was after. But, how, for those people that are struggling with this, like, how did you come to that decision? Because I know it was so hard for you to decide, what do I do? Do I take care of myself, or do I keep trying? I knew you struggled with that. And
for sure. Yeah. And, as a holistic healthcare professional and body worker, at that time, I was going on nearing 14 years in practice and nearly 12 years in business when I made this decision to close. And chronic fatigue syndrome and dysautonomia really had floored me, and to the point where I really couldn't function. And to my clients, I always preached that you need to take care of yourself first and foremost. And it's something that we hear a lot, but how many of us actually do it? Mm-hmm. It's really important to me to practice what I preach and to not be a hypocrite. So I really thought about and just really listened to my body. Those days, of which I've had countless in the last probably 8 years, especially. There's I just couldn't get off the couch, and the thought of trying to be present, to show up for, and to facilitate and guide my clients in their sessions and do the physical work I was just like, my body was just like, no. I was like, I can't do this. It feels like I'm filled with sand. Like the amount of effort it takes just to get up to do anything is just extreme. So, after talking it over with my husband, and he absolutely supported me in the decision, and we looked at all of our numbers and made sure that it was something that was going to work for us. But I cut back as much as I possibly could in my practice without essentially having a very expensive hobby. So
Yeah.
I realized that, it wasn't doing myself any good. It was harming myself by continuing to push, 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 push. Because I had already pushed for 7 years at
Yeah,
that point.
exactly.
And, just realizing that I'm not going to do my clients the best service that I can, and I'm not going to show up for them in the way that I want to if I keep doing this. And it's not good for anybody. So it was a very hard decision. But I think in a way I dodged a bit of a bullet by closing my practice as planned on January 30th of 2020. So,
Yeah.
there is an upside to that. But I announced that back in September of 2019. So that was a long time to notify everybody. But yeah, that decision and the whole processing of grief was not a fast thing at all. People think that grief is this like, okay, you go through all these stages, it's linear, and boom, you're done. And it's like, no. And I didn't even want to address any of that to begin with. And then all these things just compounded, and it was just like more and more to deal with and more to process. And just like, seriously, like, I can't take anymore.
Oh my gosh, yes. And and then when we were talking, during that time, you had been in grief for quite a while
Mhm.
already from the loss, right? From
Yeah.
being not being on the couch and not being able to move. I mean, anybody with a chronic pain, illness, and that's one of the things that I understood with you was
Mhm.
because I had gone through the kind of botched back surgery and, the fusion and that which gave me chronic pain, and also having the brain surgery, which isn't like a brain injury, but it kind of was. I mean, they do put
It
that in
is.
the classification of that.
Mhm.
And because there's a loss, so much loss there of our physical abilities, our mental abilities, and not being able to be there for ourselves, let alone others. And I don't really think that people understand it's a grieving process. It's almost like an ambiguous grief because it's like I'm still here, I'm not dead, and nobody else has died. But what is this depression or sadness or this anticipation and all of these feelings that we have?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and and it was fascinating to be able to have this conversation with you about the grief because it made it clearer for me too about going through grief and how many people suffer with that.
Yeah.
And, when we talked about this, because we've done some forgiveness work together,
Mhm.
and, which is, I think is really important, and grief and forgiveness are so intertwined. How do you feel that grief ties into forgiveness?
Well, in the first years, especially after the brain injury, as I tried to navigate a new normal and a continually evolving new normal, it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Mm.
I was really angry. And I think that's the part of grief that I really hung on to and was really kind of in for a long time until I really started working with a therapist who pointed it out to me and was like, "Oh, that's what that is."
Absolutely.
And I was angry at the people who caused the car accidents. I was angry at the horse. I was angry at myself for not staying on, for not being a better writer, because I should have been a better writer. I should have stayed
Right.
on.
Absolutely.
I was angry that I had no control over any of it and that all this had upended my life and really affected my brain, my body, my business, my family, like all of these things that I just had no say in and I had no culpability in either.
Right.
And when I started to process the grief, I realized that I'd been holding on to it so tightly with that white knuckled grip, and was really reluctant to let it go.
Mhm.
And it's easy to be angry and go, see, I'm the victim here. And I liked being in that place because it's an easy place to stay in. Not a productive or healthy place, but it's an easy one to be in. And it's really similar with my experience with the forgiveness work with you, because it's so much easier to blame circumstances or someone else for our pain and our suffering. And you often ask, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And here you could also ask, do you want to hold on to it or do you want to be happy?
There you go. Well, yeah. And the beautiful thing going through the process together and the process that you had started, it was giving the permission to be to it's okay to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to feel the feelings. It's what we do with it, right?
Yes.
Instead of the blaming, how can I do it in a healthy way? And I remember, was it your therapist that suggested the rage room? I can't remember, but I
I can't
remember.
remember either, but I did go to one. Yes.
Oh, I loved that. And because I would throw dishes, at the outside. Went to Goodwill and I got dishes and I throw them against the side of the garage. But you did the rage room, which I think is fabulous because you were saying, how exhilarating. At first it's weird
Yeah,
breaking
it is
stuff,
weird.
but it's also a really healthy way
Yeah.
to get out the anger and to move, because anger is not a bad, I want to say this to people, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad emotion or feeling. It actually is higher than sadness on the scale of consciousness when we look at our emotions. And it's actually good because it can be motivating.
Yeah.
It can be moving. We just don't want to stay stuck in it, where you just mentioned so beautifully to blame others and the circumstances. And I was really happy because you had helped me so much in understanding my body and how it worked and gave me relief from my chronic pain. And it was such an honor to be able to walk through forgiveness with you. And because you have been through so much in these past 10 years. I mean, even longer, but we'll
Yeah.
just go with that.
Roughly 10. Yeah, 10 and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. With a lot of physical challenges
Mhm.
that was really hard, but it's also mental and emotional, I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah.
But the wonderful thing about you, one of the many, is that you always look for the lessons or the key takeaways or what you've learned, right, along the way. And I love how you write about that, because we're going to talk about your book, because I think that was fabulous and it's a resource that we are highly going to recommend to people. But for you, with everything you've gone through, what do you feel are some lessons or key takeaways that you've learned that you want others to know about?
When I hit my 10-year anniversary of my TBI at the end of last year, I really thought about that. And, I wrote about it and did a video on it. So I'll try to keep it really short here and just hit the key points. But one of them, and this can apply to any trauma, any like life-changing experience, whether it seems big to you, well, it's always going to seem big to you, but whether you think it's big or not relative to what society labels it.
Mm.
If it's life-altering for you, this will apply. And it's that you can't go back. Everyone wants to say, well, I want to get back to normal. And boy, do I hear that a lot from especially people who are very new to the TBI journey. I just want to get back to normal.
Mm.
And it's just like, oh, honey, that's not an option. Because, we can never go back. We have two options. At least I see it that I had two options, that I could stay stuck exactly where I was, or I could choose to move forward in some way.
Mm.
And that might look different at any given second of the day, on any given day. But I want people to know that Yes, these things are hard. They suck. They're unfair. They're devastating. And yet, with a lot of determination, support, effort, energy, and often, honestly, a fair amount of money,
Yeah.
you can create your best possible life, even if it looks very, very different from what you ever envisioned.
Mm. That's the one thing that you did, I think, pretty well was sought out support. It took a little bit to get there, but you sought out support. And I think, where would you suggest people go? Like as a start, how would people, because some people are sitting there, I know I did, in pain, going, there's no hope. You feel hopeless,
Yes.
right? And you don't even know where to start. Now, the beauty about you is like you do the research and you're like action, where you're like, okay, after a little bit, it's like sit there. But some people get stuck
Mhm.
and feel really, which I don't blame them at all. It's like I don't even know where to go.
Yeah.
Where would you suggest starting with support?
Just support in general.
Yeah, yeah. For like chronic, well, either the TBI, because we'll talk about your book, because that's a
Yeah.
huge support. But did you do something before that? What did you do like for your own support?
In terms of trying to get the care that I needed, I just started asking my providers and people I knew. And being a provider myself, I knew a lot of people who knew people. So I thankfully had that advantage because I knew people who knew people, but you don't have to be a healthcare provider to know people who know people.
Good.
And it was really just starting to ask and just talk about, hey, I've got this problem. Like, who do you know? And there's that common phrase that I know that you and I know very well. Who do you know?
Who do you know?
Yeah, and it is really useful. Some people don't have the energy or the capacity to be searching online and doing things like that. Some people don't have support of immediate friends or family very much at all either. So whoever you have access to, whoever is on your side, like who's on your team in some regard, tell them what you need. And sometimes you may not even know what you need. That's the hard part. It's like,
Right.
I just need help.
Hmm.
But if you start to talk about what is going on, other people can also help you. And just the asking, who do you know? It's like, I need help with this. Who do you know?
Hmm.
It can start the ball rolling. But the first step is to ask for help. And I used to think that I could do everything on my own. Like, I was like, I'm going to do everything by myself. I don't need anybody else.
Yep.
Yes, we laugh about it because I
Yes.
was so wrong.
Yeah.
So
Like,
wrong.
how's that working for you?
Yeah, it didn't.
I know that one too. And I guess I would also something was popping in as you were talking. Um in your book that we'll mention in just a moment. It's called Head of Hope. And I really like um the way that you give resources, but you describe like how does somebody know that like okay, for instance, like I was mentioning like I was listening on a webinar, and in the chat on this webinar, people were putting what's going on lately or whatever, and this woman said, hey, I just was taken to the hospital for a concussion, and just like the day like yesterday, and it was like nobody said a thing. Nobody said, but then somebody mentioned happy birthday. It was their birthday, and they said, "Oh, happy birthday." And the one
Wow.
thing, as I've gone through these years of dealing with my own chronic pain, but also your experience and some other people's, it's written off.
Yes.
Seriously, I think they're starting to, because of football and stuff, they're starting to bring it out. But when you wrote your book, I mean, it really hadn't been talked about as much as I would like it to be because, learning my sister was in a car accident, had a TBI decades ago, and she's now disabled because finally it's realizing, oh my gosh, this is what it happened then. And
Hmm.
she's been trying so hard to work and to do things and just was so full of shame because she couldn't. And it's not her fault. It's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. But how do they know that they have like a TB, especially a TBI?
Yeah, there are a lot of different symptoms, and besides information in the book, there's a great resource of Brain Injury Association of America is one. There's also the Brain Injury Alliance,
Oh, good.
and they've got some great resources there for both folks who are directly affected by brain injury as well as people and their families and caregivers. So great resource. One myth is that you have to lose consciousness. So people are like, "Oh, but I didn't get knocked out." Well, guess what? You don't have to be knocked out or lose consciousness to have a brain injury. Or like, "Oh, it was just a mild car accident. You know, it was fine." Guess what? It doesn't have to be a severe car accident.
Okay.
Or like, "Well, you know, I don't have any like skull fracture or anything like that." Well, you don't have to. There are different kinds of traumatic brain injuries in terms of like how they happen. And so you can hit your head on something. It could be a car accident, but you could be a slip and fall. It
Yeah.
could be, I had a friend who they were doing remodeling work and their spouse accidentally, like, it was just a total fluke, but like there was a bit of a collision with some, I think I want to say it was a hammer, not hard, but it was enough, right? So like just accidents happen, but there are also assaults,
Yeah.
domestic violence, and things like that. And I just learned a new statistic that it's like 60+% of domestic violence survivors have symptoms of brain injury. I
Wow.
just learned that from the Brain Injury Association of America just this last week. So, any head trauma
Hmm.
um, is a really good indication. And especially if you're having issues with memory, with understanding things, with words, focus, concentration, you can't regulate your emotions.
Oh,
That's a really big one for me.
that was a big one for me too. And the light sensitivity
Yes.
and the hearing, the
Yeah.
all of that. Our brains are like sitting they're so vulnerable, right? They're sitting in the middle of all this fluid.
Yep.
And it's not like they're solid, you know what I mean? And so we forget that. And so I really want to encourage people to really to reach out, to get support, to do the things, because if you're questioning, if you're just feeling different than you were before after any kind of head trauma, take it seriously.
Mm.
Um and because I think that this is important, and thank you for those couple of resources too, because I think that that's really valuable. I love having resources. And along with, even like Facebook groups too. You were a
Yes.
part of a couple of
Hmm.
those and you were contributing, and that I know you have found to be super helpful too. So yeah, so thank you for bringing all of that up. And I wanted to talk about, because this is something that I want to talk more about, and that's forgiveness in the sense of our bodies. Um, and, it's something I haven't dove into 100% yet, but I really want to do that. We've got that, and then we've got the forgiveness of all the other things.
Hmm.
So you and I have had many conversations about forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so, I guess when we talk about forgiveness, it's such a big umbrella that people don't necessarily, it's almost scary,
Yeah.
because it's like they don't know about it. We don't know who we're going to become because of it. Do I have to let go? Like you talked about the story, right? It's like the story of anger, or the story of they did this to me. Um, we've had many conversations. So, in the forgiveness work that you've done, what has been your biggest breakthrough that
Well,
you've had that you would like to share?
yeah. Our My biggest breakthrough so far, because our work is never done, but is our recent really deep dives, and we looked at some of these really long held beliefs that I've had for most of my life, and they have nothing to do with the accidents directly, but yet they interweave themselves into the whole story. But I had these beliefs really my whole life, and even though they weren't the impetus for our work together, you helped me get to the core of them, and it was really very quickly, like in our first session. But we've already done a lot of work to begin with to prep, so
Right.
we were able to do that. But so much of it was, and I know a lot of people have this core belief that I'm not enough
Mm.
for whatever reason. It doesn't even matter the reason, but I know it's a very common thing of I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And I had that with me for pretty much as long as I can remember. And it plays out into every single role and aspect of our lives. I know it did for mine. And when we did our recent work together, there was a really big energetic shift, and the biggest one that I've had in our work so far. And other people noticed, like at that point, I mean, chronic fatigue syndrome was still very debilitating, but someone said, "Oh, you look, a lot like more energetic." And I was like, "Well, thanks. I don't feel that way, but I'm glad that it looks that way because
Yeah.
I've had a really good energetic shift."
Yeah.
And I feel so much freer, which I know a lot of people say after doing the forgiveness work. Um, but I can't think of any other way to describe it. So to change and break free from those beliefs that aren't true really has been life changing and has dramatically changed how I treat, talk to, and think about myself in a much healthier and positive way.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And it is nice to see it because you can see it on you. You can see it. And that's the beauty of when I work with people because I can watch them change on the screen, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of like when we start the work, how it just, it's because it's heavy. It
Yeah.
is heavy. And so when people say, I feel, it's like, oh my God, I'm lighter and I'm freer. Because I feel like that when I do the work too. So I really appreciate you sharing that because we've done some pretty
Hmm.
heavy lifting. And you know that I'm not good enough, especially with our bodies,
Hmm.
that really plays out
Yeah.
deeply in all, and like how we do anything is how we do everything. And being able to get that freedom for you is just an honor for me, because it just shifts how you approach life, right? And how it just makes it different. And that's what I love about the forgiveness because it's not for other people.
Hmm.
It's for ourselves and everybody hears that, but they still don't. It's like I want to help people understand that. Like you just
Yeah.
said, it's like, how I look at how I treat you, how you treat yourself
Yeah. And
different.
it ripples out into my relationships and my outlook on life. And I honestly think that it has contributed to some of the really positive changes that have happened in my health in the last couple of months, thanks to some other things that I've done as well. But I think it was a contributing factor um, because it just, I think, opened me up to that possibility that I am enough
Yeah.
and to finally believe that because especially with being disabled and going through that process, and then especially in our society where that honestly equates to being less than,
Right.
right? Because if we're not productive, if we're not making money, if we're not contributing to our capitalistic society, then we're
Right.
not doing our part, right? We're
Yeah.
somehow less than, and especially people in the disabled world, whether it's an invisible disability like mine are,
Yeah.
or it's invisible, it's still like, oh, well, there's something wrong with you and you're not whole, you're not complete.
Mhm.
And so it adds to that for me of that I'm not enough.
Yes.
And and especially like going through the whole disability process, it definitely reinforces that. So to really break free from that and to say, like, I'm not going to buy into that
Yeah.
really made such a big difference in just grading through my daily life and accepting my reality and then opening up to the possibility of changes as they come and things that don't change and all of it's all good.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. And because it's big and we both understand for the listeners what it feels like to not have that hope and to go through taking a look in the decision making on what do I do and not do, and filing of disability, working through all of those things. That's what forgiveness can help with,
Mhm.
in the sense of it can really empower us to know we're okay, that it doesn't matter what society says, and that's a hard one,
Mhm.
but society has a whole different view than what we need to look at for ourselves. And that's, I think, was it's been so good to see you go through this and really embody the change.
Mhm.
And all of the things that you're doing is amazing. And I'm just so grateful that you are in my life. And so thank you for that. And also tell us about this book, because I would really like people. It is you did such a good job on it. A lot of research, and story, and you just did such a good job.
Well,
And
thank
so,
you.
can you tell people a little bit the name of the book, tell them about it, and then where they can get it?
Yeah. So the full title of the book is Head of Hope, a resource and empowerment guide for living and thriving with a traumatic brain injury. And it is just a short, concise, essentially handbook of what to do, who to see, and what can possibly help. It's great for those who are newly affected by brain injury, but even those who have been living with one for quite some time. Now, I understand that a lot of brain injured folks have trouble reading. So if you're one of those or know someone who is, having someone close to the brain injured person read it to them or for them is always an option, so that at least the information is still available to you. But really, it came about because I knew that, even though, as I mentioned earlier, that I knew people who helped start me down the path to figuring out who I needed to see and what could help. But I didn't even know what to do or who to see. And certainly no one told me, at the ER, again, like, they didn't give me any resources. So I thought that a concussion, even though I'd written a paper on it years before that, I thought it was just kind of like, oh, no big deal. And I admit, for a lot of people, they do actually kind of resume normal life after a number of weeks. But some of them, like me, do not.
Yeah.
And for those of us who do not, it's really a difficult thing to figure out what to do next. So I knew that if I had that much difficulty figuring it out, then the average person who didn't have those connections was probably struggling even more. And the whole point was to reduce other people's pain, suffering, and struggle even a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's my story. So if you want to know a bit more about what happened, it's in there. Also, the aftermath, which I didn't go into today.
Yes.
Domino effect, complete domino effect that developed over years afterward. So not everything happens all at once.
Mm-mm.
So just sharing a bit about that so people aren't blindsided like I was, and then different modalities that can help. So there's a lot of research information, a lot of footnotes in there for people who like to know where those stats and everything came from. And then there's aspects in there for people to actually fill in, like questions of like, well, based on all of these providers and resources, does one of them resonate with you to start? Like, where do you want to start? So it's also a little bit of a workbook with not much for you to fill in, but a few opportunities to kind of guide you, and even in possibly finding the gift in your experience.
Yeah.
And even as I quote you in there, of being willing to be willing. So Brenda's quoted in there talking about being willing to be willing to even think about
Yeah.
considering the possibility that there might be a gift in this experience. So it's available on my website, which is headofhope.com, as well as on Amazon as well.
Oh, that's so good. And I'm so, like I said, I'm so grateful for this resource. It's so helpful. And so I encourage you, or if you know of someone, it's a great, like she said, it's a handbook. So it's a great way to start and to even figure out, because as I learned with my sister and I learned with you, all of the symptoms don't show up right away. This is something that, they're learning about the body, right? That what they think isn't necessarily true. and that the body's an amazing, amazing thing, yet it also, we got to take care of it, and we have to watch out for certain things, because when it comes to the brain, there's a lot we don't know yet.
Yes.
And so, so I encourage you to get that. And Jennifer, I'm so grateful to have you today. And thank you for sharing about your story. And I encourage you to read more about her story, because the aftermath, what she has been through, is amazing. And it's also fills you with hope. For me, it did. And also for people who feel a little hopeless right now, this can bring some hope. And also, so I'm going to encourage you to get the book and check out her website. And gosh, thank you again so much for being here. Is there anything else you want to leave? Some parting words with anybody?
I think at least when it comes to the forgiveness work, if it feels scary, if it feels big, if it feels even like I don't even know what the hell it is, but I feel like I might need it, just don't hesitate. Just do this work. It is not necessarily easy work. I will be honest. It's not easy. It's not necessarily fun, but Brenda makes it as pleasant as possible. And you got to get to that muck in order to get out of it, right? You got to be in it to get out of it. So the only way out is through.
Yes.
And it is so worth it. It is worth the investment of your time, your energy, and your money. And you are worth it, because this does transform people's lives. And even if it doesn't make sense of like, well, how does that happen? Like with the work I used to do with folks in my body work, it's like, can't really always explain the hows, but you know the benefit of it, and that's really all that matters.
All that matters. Oh, good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again, Jennifer, for being here. So folks, listen in or go ahead and get her book if you're so inclined. And I am thankful that you're here, and thank you for listening today. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it, would you do me a favor and share this episode, and then follow us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss one episode of the Forgive Yourself podcast, where every Friday you will get tips, tools, and stories so that you can turn your pain into peace. Take care.